This is the second segment of input for this week 1, Leading and Managing Effective Human Rights Organisations. The first segment introduced a broad understanding of the word organisations and their ability to impact or offer opportunity for achieving things through our lives. I looked at the risks of poor leadership and management within a human rights context. And I offered some definitions of human rights organisations, including non-traditional organisational forms for social movement and social change. And I linked those non-traditional models to readings on the VLE for this week. The main readings for all students, the reading relating to the changing faces of citizen action, and everyday revolutions in the postgraduate certificate reading list for those who want to take their studies further. This second segment looks in more detail at the words effective in relation to effective human rights organisations. So what do I mean by the word effective? And how can it be demonstrated as an important characteristic for organisations to seek? I guess mainly I'm talking about internal health and external effectiveness, bringing together to help define what might make an effective organisation. So internal health, I'm meaning how the organisation treats the people inside the organisation as colleagues, and as those who manage and those who are managed. And we all know of organisations that can be internally quite healthy. We may also sadly have had experience of very unhealthy organisations internally. But it's not just about internal health. Effectiveness also links to external effectiveness. How good is the organisation at doing what it says it is doing? How well does it make use of its funds? And how well is it able to deliver according to the donor's desire and according to the wishes and needs and rights of stakeholder communities? How relevant is the organisation and how effective is it in its context? And again, we may know organisations that are externally very effective or sadly some that are ineffective. And it seems to be a paradox that an organisation, for example, might be very effective externally and yet be a nightmare to work for, or the other way round. A healthy organisation full of good collaborative team relationships and cultures, and yet externally an organisation that is not very effective in meeting its goals. So I see a balance there of health and effectiveness in understanding the overall effectiveness of an organisation. Here's another take on effectiveness: a well-designed and led organisation responding creatively, relevantly and materially in significant ways to the context it finds itself in. So their effectiveness being creative and relevant given the needs and rights of people it is working with. So there, again, the sense of an organisation making a helpful difference in the world. And of course, helpful depends on your worldview and your context. Within the human rights sector, of course, the implication is that a helpful difference is about rightful protection and promotion of human rights, the empowerment and engagement of citizens, and the strengthening of civil society as a whole. For example, you may have other criteria. And I'm taking these definitions, these criteria of effectiveness, as applying to all shapes and sizes of human rights organisations, from the smallest to the largest, from the most influential to those that could be much more influential. And whether or not they are formally organised, if they are a network or a collaboration, an informal collective, I think having a sense of how effective are we is important for every organising form to have in mind. They all have to work out what are we trying to do and why. And how should we organise? How should we distribute power? How should we negotiate decision-making protocols? how should we hold ourselves accountable? And how do we check that we're keeping on track for the goals that we set ourselves, or that have been set for us by the communities we work with, or by the donors who give us the money. So I see this as an obligation on all people working in the human rights sector to have these questions in mind. And that, in effect, excuse me, is the emphasis and the purpose of this course, to help you in your human rights context, your human rights organisation, think about and work on these questions too. So, the module title talks about leadership and management. How might we distinguish them? And here's a very simple definition, and there's more material on this on the VLE and for this week's discussion board. And again, I really encourage you to join this discussion based on your own experience, as well as any reading that you may be able to do, but based primarily on your own experience. So here's a definition. Management is doing things right. Leadership is about choosing and doing the right things. So we see here that management, the task of management being the carrying out of program or organisational objectives. So those have been set by some part of the organisation, the board, the senior leadership team. It's management's job to carry them out. And leadership is that bigger picture work, that strategic prioritising and strategy setting, looking at the horizon, working out what's coming towards the organisation, working out what the organisation could then choose to do with the opportunities and skills and resources that it has. That kind of looking upwards and out to the horizon, compared to a management heads down, looking at the tasks on the to-do list, on the organisational to-do list, and making sure that those are done right. So I hope that helps in helping you think, if you've not thought already, about the difference between leadership and management. And there are many distinctions, but there's one to get your thinking going. And I'll say more about leadership next week, but I wanted to introduce the concept of leadership with this very neutral definition, a process of social influence which maximises the efforts of others towards the achievement of a goal. So there we see leadership as engaging and collaborating with other people towards a particular purpose. And that leadership is that action of the person's charisma, ideas, energy, enthusiasm, and personal skills, collaboration and interrelational, human relational skills, in order to influence and inspire and engage others. And I say that's a neutral definition because it does not seek to determine whether the goal is good or bad, whatever that might mean, or well, and I guess I would add to this definition came from the Harvard Business Review, so a commercial sector, but nevertheless, I think it is a very good general definition of what leadership might be. And as I said, we'll look much more at leadership and in particular your own style and aspirations for your own leaderful behaviour next week. I've been thinking about leadership, particularly in the not-for-profit sector, for many years now. So what follows is not an academic, but rather my own practitioner-based experience of what I see leaders being called for. That organisations do best when they encourage leaderful behaviour that is nevertheless aligned to the organisational objectives and is held to account. So leadership is not something that just one person or a few people have. Organisations need people to be more independent, more accountable, because there is simply no longer the time to manage everyone on a day-by-day basis. We need people to be able to exercise leadership within, as I say, the purpose and boundaries of the organisation. And therefore, I'm interested in leadership that comes from the person themselves, not just from, or indeed at all from, the role that they occupy within the organisation. And so long as a culture of leadership exists, this can be done without threatening the organisation, because people understand that with responsibility comes accountability. And that leadership is not a rigid or formulaic application of techniques or skills from a textbook. It is about bringing oneself more into the world. We need to know how we engage others, how other people work, what helps in engaging and inspiring them, what builds trust and commitment and collaboration. And next week we'll look at some models of leadership, more or less effective ones, and there'll be an article around goodbye command and control. So the shift from more traditional top-down leadership styles, an article that was written 20 years ago. And I guess my aspiration for human rights organisations is that how the organisation is structured and the culture that it embodies is congruent with the changes that the organisation wishes to see in the rest of the world. So if we are calling for recognition, empowerment, rights of people in society, and yet as an organisation we systematically exploit or oppress or demean or diminish those who work for it, staff or volunteers, there is an incongruence there that I think threatens the integrity and most likely the quality of the work as well. So that word congruence, the world we wish to see, and the structural form that we are creating around us. And so if we think of non-traditional organisational forms that have more fluid processes for power and decision making, that may be appropriate for a human rights organisation compared to more traditional structures. The challenge is, of course, that legal requirements around registration and the operation of not civil society organisations often require a secretary, a treasurer, a president. So how do we handle those contradictions? And that's something that we'll explore through the module. And so ideally, to return to those ideas of health and effectiveness, organisations, human rights organisations that are congruent, demonstrate that internal health and external effectiveness. And there's a representation of that congruence. Who am I in the centre? What do I bring to work? What are my values, my passions, my love, my enthusiasm, as well as my technical skills? How do they sit and are at home with the organisation I'm in? And how do they then relate to the communities that I engage with in wider society? If you have questions about any of this, of course, do raise them on the discussion board and I'll be happy to say more. So key tasks in organisations where leadership and management matter, and which we'll address through the module, questions of accountability and strategic lead, most often set by the board in collaboration with the chief executive or the most senior staff member. Management of key projects and aspects of work. The management of people, harnessing their enthusiasm and their skills towards organisational objectives. The right holding of money, the right spending of money. Creating cultures of innovation and learning, no blame cultures where mistakes can be learned from. Understanding how the organisation grows and changes. To what extent do we build and collaborate with societies and communities in support of our existence? And the role of leaderful behaviour in all of these, regardless of seniority, in engaging and inspiring colleagues to work with us, not getting people to do things just because we force them to. So you can gather I'm taking a very idealistic view, but I think leadership in these times, 21st leadership, if you like, is about encouraging leaders and those with responsibility for other people in organisations to be very mindful of what they're creating and how the organisation is working. The role of resources plays a large part, of course. Larger organisations have more capacity for internal development and restructure and collaboration. Smaller organisations may struggle to make do, and that's an unfairness and a reality of life. I'm hoping through this course that nevertheless you get skills that you can share with your colleagues. And a touch on rights-based approaches. The idea that we are driven by rights, not needs, and that we integrate rights within strategic planning and how we work and with whom we work. And I'll say more about rights-based approaches in due course.